Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fret Buzz the podcast. My name is Aaron Sefchick.
My name is Joe McMurray.
And today we have a fellow podcaster from Solving Sounds podcast, Brent Lyons. Welcome, Brent.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Met you through some of the forums and figured we'd make some contact with each other and get some information going. So yeah, by all means, I'm excited about today's conversation because you, like us, dive into this whole musical journey of musicians.
Right.
You're based out of Seattle.
Yep, that's right.
Awesome. So if you could, for our audience, kind of set us up a little bit and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I started playing music when I was about 15. I started with the drums just because I was a pent-up teenager with a lot of energy and I just wanted to start hitting stuff. And so I started taking lessons and had some high school bands and stuff, and we were pretty crappy, as you're supposed to be, I suppose.
Yep.
And I remember we used to just record on a boombox that had a microphone. Those were my first recordings, was just setting a boombox up in the middle of the room and hitting record. And, that was...
But onto a cassette?
Onto a cassette, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I remember my mom had some old Kenny G tapes that she didn't want anymore, so we would record over those.
Over top of them?
So it would be 90% our music, but then 10% you could still kind of hear Kenny G in the spaces.
Yeah.
So that's how I got started. And then a couple of years after doing that, I was getting kind of frustrated as a drummer just because I always felt like I was kind of coming in and responding to what the guitar player was bringing in, his riffs and stuff. And I was like, man, I don't really get to be as creative as I want to be as a drummer, as just a songwriter. So I switched to guitar and started taking guitar lessons. I upgraded to a Tascam 4-track recorder, started doing some real complex recording to my, 17-year-old brain or whatever at the time.
Right.
I felt that way. And just went from there. That's kind of where I started recording by myself just for fun, doing whole songs by myself. That first Foo Fighter record that Dave Grohl did all by himself was really mind-blowing for me. That was the first time I had heard of anyone doing something like that. And from there, I just played in different bands throughout the years. And I made a lot of acquaintances in the scene, as you do. It's like you go to shows and you want to talk to people, but it's super loud because everyone's rocking out and stuff. And And so I started this podcast to be able to sit someone down and ask them everything I ever wanted to know about them and kind of figure out how they learned instruments and stuff. And it's like, how'd you write that song? How did you record that album? How did you meet your bandmates? So that's kind of how I got to where I am now.
Well, that's awesome. Not to mention that, you are in the Seattle scene. Obviously, that's been iconic in the past.
Sure.
What is going on there musically now? I mean, obviously it's still thriving, but do you see a change at all happening?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest change I've seen is just this breaking off into many different scenes happening all at the same time. There's definitely still kind of the heavy sludgy rock thing happening, but there's a huge indie rock thing happening. There's a huge folky kind of acoustic thing happening. And I would just say, instead of everyone just playing grunge music or whatever, there's a ton of different genres and scenes happening all at the same time.
Yeah. As usually, I mean, everybody knows Seattle for the grunge rock, but obviously there was a whole lot more going on at that time. Obviously because of Pearl Jam and Nirvana, they kind of made that whole thing happen. But obviously there is a whole lot more going on.
Yeah. And one other huge change is a lot of the venues that used to host all those 90s bands are closing because of, Microsoft and Amazon. It's like Seattle's going through this weird transformation now where a lot of those historic buildings are getting torn down for, condos that no one can afford.
Right.
So there's definitely that element to the scene where it's getting harder and harder to play shows and have active venues that want to bring local bands in.
Yeah.
That's a shame. That's like what happened in Arlington with IOTA Cafe.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's like one of the cooler clubs for local bands to come in, and I think the whole block was bought by a developer, and people were like trying to protest on social media and stuff, but didn't do anything.
No, money speaks louder than words.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, you know,
for sure.
you do see some of these iconic studios and venues that are unfortunately just being bought and like you said, torn down, and condos are being built. It is a shame. You know, these are iconic places that have, you know, been a very big placeholder in history in terms of what's been going on in rock and roll and music in general.
Yeah, and you really see, artists can only afford kind of cheap living to survive. So, we used to see so many artists in places like Capitol Hill and downtown and stuff, and it added so much cultural value and currency to the community. And then you see just it becomes so much more expensive to live here that it kind of drives the artists out, and you kind of lose so much of that identity, and everything just gets kind of plain and boring, and all the artists move to another cheap place to live and kind of create it all back up again.
Yeah, it's happening all over. Like going back to the 60s or 70s, it happened with San Francisco
Right.
and LA. It's happening right now currently with Nashville. Nashville used to be fairly affordable. Now it's just a booming town, and you do see a lot of the musicians moving outwards into the suburbs and whatnot like that. I know with Nashville, I haven't followed up with it lately. I know there was a big thing going on. If anybody in the audience knows, email me. But I know with Nashville, they were going through this big thing of how they were shutting studios down that were out of houses, since we're kind of talking about that today. Um, any businesses that were in a house and they were a studio, there was some kind of city ordinance against that, and they were shutting people down,
Wow.
which is really weird for a city of music.
Yeah.
Which was the whole hubbub about the whole thing. Is this like, really, we're the city of music, we're known for this, and you're starting to go after people who are, you know, recording music out of their houses and making businesses out of it. So it was this whole, I know a couple months back it was this whole thing, and I don't know whether anything has become of that or not. But yeah, it's a shame what's happening in terms of the money that's, you know, kind of unfortunately having a say over history.
Hmm. Yeah, and art especially.
Yeah.
In Seattle, is the scene the type of scene where you, as a band, go out and play and you're paid to play, or is it more of a pay to play scene? Or is there some of both, depending on which of those sub scenes you were talking about?
It's a little bit of both. There's definitely a few clubs that make you sell tickets.
That's so
And it's like you have to like
Yeah.
you have to like buy the tickets in advance and then sell them to like make the money back.
Yep.
Fortunately, there's only like one or two that still do that. But the thing I see a lot more now is venues just have really expensive not fees, but they just take a lot off the door, and they usually say it's for like the sound guy or like a room fee or something like that. But I've seen it be like $80 to like $100
Wow.
off the door, which is pretty gnarly.
Wow, that's pretty steep.
Yeah.
Wow.
But there's definitely places, I always kind of call them more like house party shows, where there'll be like this cool tavern that's a little smaller, and they'll just have the band come in and play, and the band gets all the door, and the venue just gets the bar sales, of course. But I've seen that with the more small venues, less kind of like corporate venues, and that's been working out great. But a lot of the times you'll see like the sound quality won't be as good, like the PAs won't be as powerful,
Right.
especially if you're in like a rockin' band. The guitar amps will like blast the venues like PAs, so you kind of have to be conscious of that. And like the monitor systems won't be as good, so it's a give and take.
So you're obviously going out and active within the music scene and seeing some good bands out there. Is there anybody, don't want to put you on the spot, but is there Is there anybody on your radar that you're like, these guys are really good, and I think an up and coming band type of thing?
Yeah, I just interviewed her name's Julie Bartlett from a band called Guest Directors, and they're like right up my alley. They're super kind of like shoegazy and spacey. Like they kind of have like a Swerve Driver Cure thing going on, and they have speaking of Seattle grunge, the guitar player from the band Tad, Gary Thornton. Do you know Tad?
No.
They're kind of in the same vein as like, do you know Mudhoney?
Yeah.
So they're kind of like the grunge bands that were happening before Nirvana. Like they kind of like brought Nirvana up.
Yeah.
So anyway, the guitar player from Tad is in this band Guest Directors, and I just think they're awesome. They just put out a new EP and they're really good. There's another heavy band called Stereo Creeps. They're just about to put a new album out called Suck. And they're super cool. They're kind of avant-garde, but still like heavy at the same time. Like they have really weird arrangements and stuff. They really work against the kind of verse chorus thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's see. There's one other band called Warren Dunes. They're kind of more upbeat, up-tempo, kind of like, I don't know it's like upbeat indie rock with kind of like a jazzy kind of feel to it. They're really great too, so I would recommend all those Seattle bands. Like look out for them. I think they're going to be doing some cool stuff.
Cool. Yeah, definitely have to check those guys out. Yeah. Awesome. So just before we quick jump in, so you have your podcast Solving Sounds, and that comes out weekly?
Every other week. I would like to do it every week, but as y'all know, I'm sure it's hard to
just a little bit.
I feel like if I did it every week, the commitment of just the like administrative work of like emailing people, recording it, editing it, like honestly, I dread editing podcasts. I barely do any editing at all. But just like recording the intro and all that and writing the show notes, hate doing that. But I just kind of felt like if I did it every week, it would turn into a stressful thing. Whereas I feel like every other week, it's a little bit more casual. I can kind of take my time, pick my moments, and it always kind of feels fun. So to answer your question, I release every other Tuesday. That's my schedule.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah, we're fortunate. We have two of us.
Yeah,
which helps a little bit. Aaron still takes the brunt of it, but
yeah,
the editing.
Yeah, it's just me doing everything. But I kind of like it that way.
Yeah, you have control.
That's exactly right.
I listened to your episode with Lance Hofstad.
Oh, good choice.
I really enjoyed that, and I did feel like your show has a similar kind of vibe and overall goal to our show, just to explore other people's thoughts about music and really to dig in.
Yeah, I really loved that episode. He was the first person that I had on that I had actually been in a band with in the past. And so I thought it would be kind of cool because I was so close to his writing process and I respected him so much that I really felt like I could really dive deep into the nitty gritty. And he's such a unique guy. Like, we were talking about like the bullhorn and stuff.
That was his megaphone that he
yeah. He's just completely original that way. So I was really proud of that episode because I thought we really got to talk about some cool topics and kind of his original approach to songwriting and a lot of show dynamics, how to get people interested in the show and kind of breaking the fourth wall and audience participation, all that kind of stuff.
Right. For our listeners who haven't heard that episode, you should listen to that episode. But the bullhorn that he was referring to, in order to get the audience involved in the show, and because you've all been at a show where everybody's standing towards the back of the room and the band's up there playing, they're really trying to get all the audience to come forward and dance and enjoy themselves. So the guy Lance actually comes in from the back of the room with a megaphone and like points at people and tells them to come up to the front of the room and like really
he just starts saying yep. He's like yep. And he like makes eye contact with people and points at them, and it's always great because the audience is really kind of thrown off right away.
Oh yeah.
And at first they're like, is this dude in the band? Is this some like crazy dude off the street? Like, who is this guy? And then you kind of see this arc where they kind of figure out like, oh no, this is all like part of the show, and it just kind of breaks this kind of preconceived notion about what a show should be. And I think people get like excited, and he kind of, you know, shepherds them up closer to the band. And it's just this, to me, I always thought it was a great way of just kind of breaking people out of their comfort zone, and everyone's kind of like on their heels, like what's about to happen, you know, what's happening right now. And I just love that.
Yeah, it's actually brilliant because you're right from the get-go, you're pulling them in. Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yeah. I am trying to rethink some of my ways that I
you need
talk to the audience. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to copy that one. At least for my kinds of shows by myself, that would be a little over the top. For, you know, I'm usually the guy in the corner of a bar right now or somewhere. I don't need people to all come and form a dance floor.
Yeah,
but in a band situation, that there are times where some sort of gimmick like that would have been very useful.
Well, it's hard. I think people naturally like want to stand back, like they're afraid to get really close to the stage. And I think just kind of letting people know that it's okay and that you want them to get involved is really helpful.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
I was gonna say we had a guest, Joe Ham of El Sistema, on several weeks ago, and I had the opportunity to play with him a couple times in a jazz quartet, but we also got into some pop stuff and more modern stuff. And he actually, in the middle of the show, he's like, let's try this thing. So he calls out to the audience and he has somebody say one topic, and somebody said something about aliens. And then he calls on somebody else and they brought up something, and we ended up we improvised the song, and our singer sang about aliens doing whatever that, I forgot what the other person said, but it worked really well because people were actually invested in the song because they had brought up the topics from the audience.
Right.
And it was one of the more successful things I've been involved in.
Wow, it's a pretty cool improvisation exercise right there.
Yeah,
not exactly easy to do on the spot, that's for sure.
Fortunately, the singer's pretty good with her lyrics. But we just had the bass player started a riff and we kind of came up with the groove, and she made it up about aliens.
That's interesting. That's
really cool.
Yeah, there's a podcast that I listened to recently called Song Salad. And it's an interesting concept. They actually have a random generator of genres. So there's like 500 genres where they'll randomly pick a genre of music, and then they'll go to Google and put in a random generator for Google, and it'll come up with a random subject, and they have to write about that subject in the random genre each week. And it is a little strange sometimes. Sometimes they succeed, sometimes they don't, but it's a good idea because in terms of the musicality behind it, I listen to it because of when they do have a genre that, like last week they had a typical march, like basically what you would think for the military or something like that. And then he kind of dives into all the properties that make up a march, and it's kind of interesting. So that's the reason I listen to it, is kind of get a better idea of all the genres that are out there and what kind of makes up and constitutes that actual genre. So yeah, it's not easy.
I was just talking to someone about the positivity of putting creative constraints on yourself, because sometimes you can kind of get stuck in your own way, or you get kind of I don't know, in your comfort zone, or you figure something out and then you just hit that same button over and over again. And when you put constraints like that on, like choosing a random genre or random words, it kind of makes your brain work in a different way. And even if the end result isn't exactly what you want, just kind of pushing the limits like that can really help your creativity, and maybe that sparks something that you end up using or liking.
Yep. I listened to as well Graham Cochran of the Recording Revolution, and he does that type of thing a lot, where he'll actually tell his audience to, only use stock plugins from, Pro Tools. You're not allowed to use any, third-party plugins, or Joe Gilder will tell you same type of thing. But putting those constraints on any musician will actually kind of sometimes push you further, because you only have so many things that you can work with, and then you have to push yourself as an artist to really work those tools.
Yeah, same thing with like analog versus Pro Tools, like only having a certain amount of tracks that you have available versus like Pro Tools where you can just create endless tracks. It's like you can kind of drive yourself crazy with the endless possibilities.
Yeah.
But only having a set amount of tracks kind of forces you to make creative decisions in the moment, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I like putting physical restraints on myself in my practice. Sometimes, like, I'm not allowed to use my second finger or something like that.
Oh, wow.
It can be an interesting exercise to just try to get you out and to not play in a certain position on the guitar.
Right.
That's one of the most effective things. Yeah, it's especially helpful in, like, if I'm soloing over a jazz tune that I've played over a lot. Like, if I stay in the same spot, like, there's a tendency to want to do certain types of licks, but if you just move into a different area of the fretboard that you're not used to playing in for that tune, it makes a huge difference. Like, you're forced to play something completely different.
Yeah. No.
Can I ask you guys a question real fast? Is that allowed?
Yeah, go right ahead. Anything you want to ask, go ahead.
So I am not a virtuoso guitar player. I'm more of like a rhythm guy, and who kind of like I never took like classic training or anything.
Yeah.
And so I'm always fascinated by people who like do a ton of soloing or lead playing. And I was curious how you figured that out. Like, I've heard a lot of people talk about like the boxes for like leads, you know? And that always seemed crazy to me, because I remember my guitar teacher tried to show me just like finger positions for scales and stuff, and that just like didn't resonate with me. It's like I wanted to know what the notes were in the key and like why I was doing that. And so it's like that's sort of like the longer and like harder way to do it, and I never quite mastered it. So like how do you guys like solo? Is it just kind of the box thing, or what are you thinking about?
Do you want to go first, Aaron?
No, go ahead.
All right. Well, I mean, when I'm teaching a student to improvise, the box is very helpful because it gives them, kind of puts restraints. There's a finite number of options. So, I mean, I literally give them one note at the beginning. I say, if we're playing, start with something simple, something in the key of A minor or something, and give them the note A and make them play a solo using the note A. And the way you do that is by changing the rhythm of how you play that note and changing your pick attack and things like that. And then I give them two notes, maybe A and C, the root and the minor third. And then I let them play around with that. And, the root's going to be it's going to feel very resolved when you land on that. It has a sense of, feels very final, very like the end. Yeah. Whereas if you land on the minor third, it's not quite as stable sounding, and you kind of build from there. And I'm often thinking about the intervals within the key. If it's a single key kind of song, so I'm thinking about like a lot of call and response, a lot of like, you play a flurry of notes and land on the 2, which in the key of A minor is the B, and which sounds very unresolved. And then I'll play another, maybe a similar kind of lick, and land on the A or the C to give it a sense of question and then response. There's a lot of that for me. And, I do try to follow the chord progression as well. Sometimes that can sound too jazzy in a rock situation, but, if you have a chord progression and you try to play the chord tones of those chords, it'll sound good. So, I mean, there's a bunch of different approaches. What do you think, Aaron?
Well, Brent, you were saying, in terms of how you wanted to learn it was the notes, and like you were in the minority.
Yeah, I know.
All of my students just want to know the pattern. Just show me the pattern. And I'm always like, no, it's more than the pattern. You need to know the notes. So I would love to have a student like you.
Oh, thanks.
But
well, it's the longer and harder road to take, right?
It is, but exactly, you're learning the language,
right.
It's you are more fluent in how you are able to construct these lines. For me, I like to feel it. I don't think about the intervals, and I don't think about the root and the third. I just kind of let my ear take me where I need to go. I like to explore the neck for fun. I try not to stay in the same shapes. And I do move from quote unquote box to box. But I'm not really hard fast on any of that. I'm usually just letting my ear kind of guide me in terms of the sound that I'm looking for, whether I should be playing an E on the fifth string or that same E on the fourth string, or how I want it to come across. Um, I think that for me, um, just that overall feel is really what's important to me. If I play something, now this is all improv, of course, but if I play something and I hear something, what I try to tell my students is that once you hear something that you like, try to repeat it. Try to repeat it a couple times. Try to repeat it, like 2 times or 4 times, and try to make that lick come alive. The more that you play it, so if you hear something that kind of piques your interest, go back to it and run it again. And then kind of you start to get into these kind of lines that are repeatable, and the listener actually can kind of identify with it as well, because it's already been played and they hear it again, like, ooh, that's kind of nice. I like how that was, I already have that motif stuck in my head. Let's hear it again. So yeah, for me, it's more of a feel type of thing. When I jump into guitar, it's just like, I already know my patterns. Now just forget the patterns and just kind of just play.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is really important to learn some licks from other lead players.
Oh yes, absolutely.
I think that you have to learn how to make your fingers move in that way, and then you can start creating your own licks in that style. I think it's important if you want to play like jam band kind of lead guitar. It's pretty helpful to learn a couple Stevie Ray Vaughan or Albert King kind of licks, BB King licks, and then you have those as you can go to them, and then you can maybe start one of those licks and take it somewhere new. But you got to understand how to get that sound in order to make up your own things that sound good in that genre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting for me. I don't have a big theory background. It's like I know what song a key is in that I'm writing, but normally when I write a lead, I just really sit down and just kind of go note by note and just kind of figure out like what's working. And just it's like I'll figure out what notes are in the scale,
Mm-hmm.
and then just kind of bounce around, and it's real kind of trial and error for me, but it's a very kind of slow process, but that's kind of my style in general. I was just talking to someone. It's like there's a lot of people that just like to kind of like get in a room and jam with people and kind of see what happens, whereas I'm kind of more the type that likes to like go in my room and kind of hide and kind of come up with something and kind of do the trial and error thing. And then when I'm happy with it, I then like present it to people. So that's just kind of my approach. And I kind of take that same approach with writing leads, where it is very sort of trial and error, just kind of sitting there kind of the hard way, just kind of piecing it together.
You're actually composing a piece. You're actually making sure all the parts sound right and there's advantages to both, where you can, like you say, go into a band environment when you guys kind of all jam it out. That's very good in terms of exploratory. You might hear something from somebody else that sparks an interest or an idea in you, and you can kind of go off and do that. I've had success with that. I've also not had success with that in terms of when I teach bands, because a lot of the times people aren't really paying attention to other people. They're kind of just paying attention to themselves. And that can go on for like an hour, and you don't really get anything done.
We use any of that?
Right, exactly. It was more just like, okay, we just jammed for an hour, and okay, sure. I'll probably forget everything that I just did. So there are pros and cons to that. But then at the same time, there's the whole composition and writing something out. And there's many ways to go about doing that. I've also played with people in the past where they're like, no, I don't like that approach because I think music should be more of an organic type of thing. I don't want to go to a concert and hear the same thing every single concert. So, you know, to each their own, and their, you know, however you want to write is completely up to you. And how you go about writing a lead or a solo or something like that, a lick, there's many ways to do that as well. Sitting down with note by note and kind of figuring out what note comes next, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes I'll hum something or I'll whistle something in the car, and I'll, you know, throw on voice memo, or I'll just kind of record it, and then I'll later on in the night I'll sit down with my guitar and try to figure out some of those licks, because you do want a lick to be somewhat hummable. You want a listener to be able to walk away and kind of sing it themselves, you know, that whole earworm type of thing. Yeah, there's many ways to go about writing a solo or a lick.
Yeah, I think for me, I would just like to get more of a theory background. Just I was always kind of the impatient teenager who just wanted to like play the song. It's like to my teacher, it's like, just show me the chords. I just want to play the song, you know?
Yeah.
And I really regret not taking the time and having the discipline to learn more theory. And it's something I would like to do now as an adult, and just kind of have in my back pocket, and just be more loose with my playing. Because right now I just feel like my playing is very intentional or something, but it's like it's hard for me to just kind of explore in the space. Like I was saying earlier, I'm much more comfortable kind of like in my room figuring it out and then bringing it, you know. And it's fine that way. There's nothing wrong with it. But yeah, just for me personally, I'm kind of at a place where I'd like to kind of open up my playing a little bit and just be a little more loose, and just kind of have the knowledge in my back pocket that I can just kind of rely on in the moment.
Yeah.
I think that having the theory, it allows you to, I think it speeds up the process. I think you can get there either way, but I think when you do know the theory, it just happens faster.
Yeah,
if you're trying to lick, you kind of know your options, and it's a little less trial and error. You kind of know one thing's going to sound one way.
Right.
But you may not, you know, sometimes you get stuck following the rules a little too much, and you do have to try to not think about it so much in order to write something different.
Yeah, I remember my guitar teacher told me you need to know the rules before you can break them.
Yep.
Yeah.
I thought that was a good.
Very true. Say that every day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a two-sided sword. Knowing theory, you obviously know all the tools in your tool chest, and you can use any one of them at any time, and it's good to be able to do that. But the other side of that sword is that when you, like Joe was saying, once you start to know the rules, you have a tendency to follow them a lot.
Right.
And it's hard to break them. I know for me, like when I was young and I didn't know any theory, it was just, you know, no rules. I get to make anything that I want. And I can go back and listen to any one of those songs that I wrote when I was younger, and I go, where's the theory behind that? Like, oh my gosh, I was thinking of some crazy chord changes that may not go together, or maybe instead of like a lead line guitar wise moving in from chord to chord, it was like a vocal thing that led me to the next chord, which has nothing to do with that key. Now later in life, I'm just more, you know, theory, this is the way this works and this is why this works, and I kind of go at a different approach. So there is that, you know, that innocence that is good to have, because you have no rules. So like I said, it's a double-edged sword. There's benefits to knowing theory, and at the same time, not as, I will say, the benefits definitely outweigh. But yeah, the whole theory thing is interesting. You fight it, especially at a young age. You fight it for so long, and then, like you said, getting older in life, you kind of sit there and go, I wish I would have paid a little more attention to it.
Yeah, just had more discipline. One area where I really see it come up is when I started to sing and do, you know, melodies over my songs. Because like you were saying, as a teenager, you can kind of, it's easier to get away with writing guitar parts and bass parts or keyboard parts in like wacky, non-linear scales or something.
Yeah.
But then when you try to sing over it, at least for me, it became really obvious, like, oh, I can't do the punk rock thing of just opening my mouth whenever it comes out is great. I actually need to like really pay attention to the key of the song. And then I became very focused on melody and how that was kind of counter to the riff. Like when I would write a vocal part, I would actually write it on a keyboard first. Like I'd figure out the key of the song and then write the melody on a keyboard, and then I'd actually record that as sort of like a backing track.
That's perfect.
And then I would write the lyrics so the syllables matched the keyboard part.
That's awesome.
And that was a huge breakthrough for me, because I feel like when I was just singing randomly, I felt like that lack of theory wasn't helping, because I'd be kind of pitchy and not know it. But then actually figuring out where the exact notes were on the keyboard and singing to that was like a game changer.
I recommend that to all of my vocalists and all the bands, is to do exactly that. Sit down with a piano and actually figure out the melodic line that you're singing. That it helps so much. Your confidence just goes through the roof in terms of knowing exactly where I need to be vocally. It's night and day.
And I feel like it really helps you write better melodies. Because I think a lot of the time in the past, the melody would kind of cater to the rhythm or sounds of the words. Like I was thinking more about like the enunciation or something like that, or like the mannerisms of saying the words, as opposed to what the melody lines actually were. Like they weren't as like hooky, I think, because I think I was thinking more about the words as opposed to the sound and the melody.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. It really is. They marry so much better that way versus trying to, put a square peg into a round hole. It's like, well, right. These lyrics, they're just gonna work. And it's like, oh, okay, sure. But if it was crafted, like you're talking about, it's just going to sound so much, the flow of the song is going to be so much better.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I learned my lesson the hard way. Like when I was in my early 20s, like I would just write songs and totally did the punk rock thing of just whatever came out of my mouth, that's good enough. And yeah, it'll work, And I quickly got smacked down. Like, oh, this is not.
Yeah.
I need like an instrument and spend, years working on it. Like I totally was just like, oh yeah, I'll just, whatever comes out is good. And it's like, no. Like I have a whole new respect for singers just in terms of that discipline, and also the vulnerability. Like it's so much more vulnerable to sing as opposed to just like plucking a string or hitting a drum. It's a whole other world, man.
Yeah, if you put your finger down in the right spot, if your guitar's in tune and you pluck that string, it's gonna sound, the right note will sound.
Yeah.
But singing, you are a lot of other factors.
Yeah, for sure.
I find that with the piano, or at least going back to what you were saying about knowing the actual melody that you're singing, or playing on your instrument, I find that it is very helpful to see the music or to play it on the piano, and then you kind of know where you can create variations. A lot of times, I'll create a vocal melody or just a instrumental melody, and it'll be okay, but then once you know what it actually is, you can actually adjust and add little little, what do you call it, not melismas, something like, when you hear Alicia Keys sing and she does all the fancy vocal runs, like little riffs off the main melody. It's hard to do that without knowing the actual melody, or at least where you are within the chord. Yeah, so I think it helps you to take your melody, and maybe like if your last chorus you want to go up and make it extra climactic, if you know what the original melody was, you can go up, like your voice probably can't go up an octave to sing the same thing an octave higher unless you're like Freddie Mercury or something. But if you go up, maybe if you were singing on the fifth of the chord, that's the time maybe that last chorus, go up to the root of the chord and kind of sing kind of what would be a harmony line. But because it's the last chorus and if you're the only singer, it just sounds extra climactic.
Right.
Yeah. Same thing with like harmonies as well, I would think.
Yeah.
Like kind of having that foundation to then work off of, like you were saying.
Way easier to write harmonies if you know what notes the original melody is.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Way easier.
Oh, yeah.
I used to like not understand at all how people sang harmonies. And then like once I figured it out, it was like, oh, like here, like even just knowing the first note of the line, where that sits within the chord. And like I said, jumping up to the next note within the chord. If you're singing, if the melody's on the root of the chord, try singing off the third and just try to sing in tune from there is the simplest way. Like to get started, you can write it out. But yeah, the piano or the guitar is very helpful. It blows my mind when people don't want to, they're scared of the piano or they're scared of the guitar and they push it aside as like too much work. I'm like, you're creating more work for yourself in the long run by not utilizing the tools that are available to you.
Yeah.
Or you're at least limiting your potential. Yeah. You can't go wrong by knowing more.
No,
really.
That's for
I
sure.
really feel like in the long run, whether it's theory or technical ability, knowing more, practicing more can't really hurt you.
No.
How long did it take you guys to get that theory foundation, would you say? Before you felt comfortable?
Oh. Well, that's two different questions.
Okay.
It took me probably, I'd say, the better part of 2 to 3 years to get the theory part of it down. But to be comfortable with it, oh my goodness, I'd say upwards of 5 to 7 years.
Wow.
I don't think I could quantify what it is, but I do know that you can get a grasp of diatonic chords pretty quick. If I can sit down with a teenager and in about an hour have them understand diatonic keys, the 1 chord, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and like maybe after a couple lessons you can get into how dominant 7th chords can help you change keys. But
oh my gosh, no, you and I have a little bit of a different approach. Like the whole diatonic chords, I take about a month to a month and a half to teach all that.
Yeah, you'd have said that you take it much slower. I like to get it. I just have a hard time holding my students' interest. I try to get the information there and then try to get them playing using that. And like they don't have it just because the one lesson, but I try not to like stay on that topic for too long without playing the instrument.
Yeah, I find that if I give them all the information, just like method books, it's just I can ask them the same question in 2 months' time, and they have no idea. They're just like, "Yeah, I forgot all that information." I'm like, whereas if I take them through the entire process, now sometimes it is painstaking. But nonetheless, if I take them through that process of intervals and understanding exactly how to build a chord and why the third is so important, and just that process with every single chord, 2 months, 3 months down the line, if I ask them, they're like, "Yep, got it. Root, third, fifth, blah 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 blah, da, 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 da. These are the chords, 1, 4, 5." Okay, and I'm like, that's what I'm looking for.
Do you guys have any books or resources that you would recommend
for theory? I'm actually writing something myself right now.
Oh, cool.
We're gonna edit. Aaron and I are gonna edit it and release it as kind of a Fret Buzz handbook.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, we're gonna try to make a workbook so it's all this stuff is easily understandable. I mean, there's tons of stuff out there, but it's always about how it's presented, and exactly what we're talking about right now is the process that we're going through.
That sounds really cool. I can't wait to check that out.
Yeah, I'd be happy to send you an advanced copy in it if you wanted to give me some feedback on what might not make sense to you, because to me it makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
it would be helpful actually.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Writing something, it's been interesting writing about these things because I think I started out writing about diatonic chords, and then I realized, okay, if someone was to read this, depending on what background they have, would they understand the basics that I use to do that? So then I had to go back, and I kept having to go back until I ended up writing from like the very beginning of music.
Yep.
Like
The key of C. Whole
like
half. Whole half.
What are the notes available? What are the notes of music? And then like, it's been an interesting thing, and it's helped me being able to teach because when you put it down on paper, it's helpful. But I do think that what works for me doesn't necessarily work for you, and it's why I have like 200 books beside me, and I mean I'm a bookworm, but everybody's got a little different approach, and depending on what you're trying to use it for in the long run, some approaches work better. Like I think different ways. If I'm improvising lead guitar, I think about it differently than if I'm sitting down to write songs.
Right.
I know for me, Brent, when I was going through this whole process, I'm the kind of personality where I have to go through it on a hands-on type of thing. That's just the way I learn. So for me, method books, they more of a reading approach did not work for me. What did work for me in terms of books was what we're doing right now, is the whole workbook, where you would actually have to go through and fill out the answers and go through the process and apply it to your guitar and hear it. And then, that whole process over again, work it, fill in the answers, play it on the guitar, hear it, and that back and forth and actually applying it. That's actually what worked for me. So workbooks, the things that actually make you go through the process, that's what made it make sense for me, at least.
Yeah, I think that really makes sense. Yeah, it's one thing to just read on the page. It's another to kind of live it and try and work it through hands-on, just kind of engage your brain in that way of kind of bringing it to life.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I would read multiple method books and it would all be up here, but I didn't make sense really until I actually applied it. And a workbook, going stage by stage by stage, actually making me go through that process. It was kind of like, now it makes sense. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
It's very helpful also if you're going back to the lead guitar thing. If you want to play lead guitar, aside from knowing how to play some licks that sound good, like you have to really understand what key the song is in, and then what your options are for playing that key. And like the diatonic chords thing is so helpful because like if you got a chord progression that's like C, F, G, you can essentially play C major scale notes. You can play, because that's the 1, 4, and 5 chords of the key of C major. C, D, E, F, G. And so if you do that, you can use C major pentatonic scale, but it's going to all sound bland after a while. So you start to learn, like you can also use like a C Mixolydian scale. You start learning all the other things, and that theory, like you just have to know where you can use certain things. Playing lead guitar in a band, like somebody will throw out a chord progression and they're like, play a little lick over this. And, you could trial and error, just like loop it and play around. But if you really know your theory, you're like, okay, this is in this key. I can do this to make it sound Allman Brothers Z. I can do this to make it sound more Stevie Ray Vaughan. Or it's very helpful to know the theory and to not necessarily, I mean, Aaron likes to write it down, but I like taking it and then just like trying to play over something using what I was learning about.
Yeah,
but that's more for a lead guitar kind of.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm interested
in.
So how long have you been playing the guitar, Brent?
I started when I was about 17, so that would be 17 years ago. Yeah, before I did some math. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I started taking lessons, and it's kind of funny. I came up in the right when like AOL came out and stuff, and I remember I kind of did myself a disservice because I would always start to look tabs up on the internet for songs. So it kind of hurt my ear training a little bit. Just like looking back, like I took like every shortcut I could, just because I just wanted to learn and play songs. I was just always into like songwriting, dynamics, like sequencing. That was always my thing, and still is for the most part. But yeah, I just wanted to learn songs right away. Once I learned, like the power chord, it was just on, in terms of like writing these crappy 3-chord punk songs, and
it works, man. It works.
Yeah. And I always got really into like the shoegazy spacey thing for some reason. Like I'm not super into gear, but I love like delay, especially in reverb and kind of playing with that.
Atmospheric type of things.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you have anything in particular on your pedal board that sounds awesome?
I have this Dan Electro reverse delay pedal.
Whoa.
Let's see, let me look at it real fast. It's just called a back talk, I guess. But that thing was just so crazy to me because it plays the signal straight the first time, and then every other time it's backwards, and you can kind of set how many times it plays it and like the frequency and stuff like that. And that was just a really weird, cool, spacey thing that I use a lot. I also, it's funny, I'm not a big Ibanez guy at all, but I have a few of their pedals, and I have their DE7 delay pedal that I've always used. I got it when I was 17 or 18, and I still use it. And it's a super solid pedal. I was actually looking on YouTube recently, and it kind of has this like vintage quality about it. Like it's kind of funny to me because I think I paid like $50 for it in 2000, I don't know, 2 or 3, something like that.
Yeah.
And now it's like super expensive comparatively. It's like doubled or tripled in value. And I'm just like, oh wow, that's crazy. Like I always thought of it as just this kind of like functioning thing.
Right.
But yeah, it's funny. I was just talking to a friend about this. Like when I was a teenager, I like was shocked that I had to pay $100 for the like chromatic tuner pedal. I was like, $100 for a tuner pedal? That's like insane. But I still use it to this day, and it's crucial. So
oh my.
I would have never bought the tuning pedal, but somebody in my old band was like wanted me to have it and gave it to me as a gift. As I played it at his wedding, and it was like, and now that I have it, I would never go back. But it's like you can buy a Snark for like $20.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Why do you need to pay so much for a pedal that does the same thing?
Yeah.
But it is nice as a muting pedal.
Exactly.
Especially.
I was just about to say that live. It helps kill the signal. Yeah. Because I used to mess around with volume pedals live, and I don't know, I just didn't like it. Like I just always found myself kind of neurotically like stepping on it to make sure it was at 100%. Because I was kind of worried it would kind of slightly go down in like 80 or 90%. But yeah, you're right. It's a great like kind of kill switch.
And that is where we're going to end it today for part 1 with Brent Lyons of Solving Sounds podcast. Be sure to head over to any one of the podcasting apps and subscribe to Solving Sounds podcast. Join us next Thursday as we get into part 2 and we start talking about the recording process of Brent's album In Flow. And if you've made it this far, by all means, you guys should head over to fretbuzzthepodcast.com and click on the old submit button and submit your songs. I would love to sit down and hear what you guys have. It doesn't matter if it's finished or if it's just an idea or whatever. I tell all my students, the more you write, the better you get. Everybody always seems to get stuck up on this, it's not so good. It doesn't matter. Put it out there. I know it's sometimes a little hard to expose yourself, but the more and more you do it, the easier and easier it becomes. So by all means, head on over to fretbuzzthepodcast.com and submit your songs. If you haven't already, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Thank you for listening. We're closing in on episode 50. We've got some really good guests coming up. Fret Buzz the podcast is labor of love for me. I really enjoy the process, and I couldn't do it without you guys. As always, if you guys have any topics that you would like us to cover or any guests that you have in mind that would be great for the show, hit me up at Aaron@fretbuzzthepodcast.com I'd love to hear from you, or even if you have just something to say, give us some feedback or just say hi to me, by all means, let me know. I'd love to hear from you guys. Other than that, thank you once again for listening to Fret Buzz, the podcast. It's been a pleasure, and I can't wait for you guys to hear the guests that we have coming up. Thank you. Have a good one, and we'll talk to you next time on Fret Buzz, the podcast.